All right, hello everyone. Welcome to my channel. I do educational videos, and um, we are on a unit where we're covering the reciprocal system of theory from Dewey B. Larson. And that is a theory of everything that Larson derived back in the 20th century up until his death in 1990. Right now, we're looking at his final book that came out in 1995. But prior to that, his final book is called Beyond Space and Time, came out after he died. And that is his attempt at going into metaphysics, religion, philosophy, um, psychology, and stuff like that. Whereas his earlier books were all on hard sciences, science, chemistry, physics, astronomy, and the like. And those books started out uh, from his fundamental postulates uh, uh, that he induced back in about the 1950s. The main one of his postulates is that the universe is not made out of matter, the universe is not made out of energy, the universe is made out of motion. Motion is the relationship between time and space. Time and space are reciprocals of each other, hence the reciprocal system of theory. And time and space have the same qualities as reciprocals, uh, such as the same way that 2/3 and 3/2 have the same qualities, but they're just inverted. And so um, the qualities that space has, time also has, which is three-dimensionality, and the qualities that time has, space also has, which is primarily progressing or the flow. It's always getting later and later. In space, it's always getting further and further apart. And both time and space are also quantized. There's a minimum unit of time and a minimum unit of space. 1 unit of space in 1 unit of time is the speed of light. And the speed of light is not the maximum speed of the universe, as Einstein would have you believe, but in Larson's system, the speed of light is the midpoint or the neutral point or the null point of the universe. That's where everything starts from, the origin. And that means that half of the universe is moving faster than the speed of light. Larson calls that sector 2, or the cosmic sector. The normal sector that we're familiar with, he calls sector 1, or the material sector, moving slower than the speed of light. And that half of the universe aggregates all together the atoms and molecules of the material universe until it gets to its most complex level, which is DNA, which has a few billion atoms per molecule. At that level, it has reached enough complexity for sector 2 to come and take over. Sector 2 comes and combines with the sector 1 unit and controls it, takes control over it the same way that a thermostat would take control of a room. And that is what Larson calls the life unit. The life unit is a combination of material and cosmic forces, cosmic entities. And then that life unit evolves, develops over time up until its most complex level, all the way from the single-celled organism all the way to the intelligent human being, which is the most complex. And at that point, the complex life unit becomes eligible to be controlled by a sector 3 entity. Sector 3 is the region that is beyond space and time, or outside of space and time, or independent of space and time, or like I was talking about, the origin. And other people would have called that God, or the gods, or the spiritual world. Larson calls it sector 3. Sector 3 is geared toward ethical behavior or good behavior, while sector 2, the life unit, the life control, is geared toward survival. And so there's some times where that survival and the ethics where they go together, but then there's sometimes where they are in conflict, in which case the human being needs to exercise free will to decide between the two. Now, we are in his final book on Beyond Space and Time, on metaphysics, and this is all about Sector 3 and Sector 3 phenomena. He went through several chapters where he was talking about communication from Sector 3. Sector 3 communicates to us variously through ESP and intuition, visions, through religious revelation, scientific insight, and all of those messages are correct, but we have to be properly prepared to decode the messages and put them into our understanding, and that is less worked out. We, as he says, I believe in this chapter here, the human beings are really kind of like single-celled organisms of ethics. Okay, our ability to operate ethically is very, very limited because we are really just starting to learn that. And so our ability to decode these ethical lessons are constrained. Now we're in chapter 21. It's called the personal, the personal aspect of ethics, I think is what it's called. And he just got done with a discussion on how it's a misnomer. Most of the religious beliefs out there would have you think that you've got to sacrifice, and that it's acting ethically is a sacrifice. You have to give up pleasures and so on. But I'm sorry, I'm trying to find my spot here again. But Larson counters that, and he really says that no, an ethical person wants to act ethically. It's not something that they have to sacrifice, that they have to do against their will. They want to behave ethically if they are sufficiently under the influence of Sector 3. And so, there's no kind of this asceticism. And then also, he's saying that there are many self-interested behaviors that are also moral because they set the stage for Sector 3 activities. So he talks about, being able to be comfortable and be not stressed out by money and those kind of things, that those are, in a certain sense, prerequisites for acting ethically. Okay, so we're going to take over here in the middle of the chapter. Those religions, talking about, those that are, talking about the asceticism and so on, have an otherworldly outlook, generally tend to regard the pursuit of pleasure, political or economic power, or other non-religious objectives as antithetical to religious beliefs, and all are open in some degree to the criticism expressed in the foregoing quotation. An excessive concentration on secular objectives to the exclusion of religious considerations would, of course, be incompatible with a religious life. But ethical decisions are made and ethical actions are taken in actual practice. Participation in the activities of the secular world is therefore essential in order to gain experience in the application of ethical principles. If it is possible at all, development of a well-rounded ethical personality without such experience is obviously very difficult. This is a general rule that applies throughout human life. One may learn the rudiments of any skill through instruction, but proficiency comes only from experience. The status of experience as a prerequisite for achieving the objective of human existence also leads to the conclusion that withdrawal from worldly activities, a practice looked upon with favor in many religious systems, is not an effective way of attaining the objective. As mentioned in the discussion of the revelation process, intense concentration upon the particular matter under consideration to the virtual exclusion of everything else appears to be helpful in setting the stage for the flash of insight that is required. But whatever the nature of the subject matter may be, religious, scientific, or other, a certain level of knowledge and experience is necessary before an individual can make the intuitive jump to a significant conclusion, and experience cannot be gained in isolation. In many respects, life on Earth is analogous to a game. A player can improve his performance to some extent by studying the principles of the game and by doing some thinking as to how best to apply these principles. But proficiency comes only as a result of practice and participation in the game. Buddha, Muhammad, and other religious leaders who withdrew into solitude to perfect their understanding were not hermits. They were men of the world who had accumulated a rich fund of secular experience before they undertook a life of solitary contemplation. The game analogy can appropriately be applied to human life in many ways. In our view of the place of religion in life, for instance, religion is one of the most important sources of advice as to how to play the game of life. Anyone who undertakes to play a game receives a great deal of advice, much of it conflicting, as to the manner of play. The value of this advice to the player does not depend upon the authority attributed to the source from which it is derived, or upon the degree of acceptance with which it is received. That value is determined entirely by the amount of gain or loss in performance that is accomplished by actual application of the recommended procedures. The same is true in the game of life. Strict conformity with the rules and regulations of one's religion is of no avail unless those rules and regulations do, in fact, express the requirements of the true moral code. It is extremely unfortunate from the standpoint of society as a whole that the agency of the social order that has the primary responsibility for encouraging conformity with the moral code should be so much inclined to portray that compliance as a burdensome task. But as individuals, we have the remedy in our own hands. We can and should refuse to accept this distortion of the truth. Each person has the responsibility of examining the moral doctrines of his religion and determining for himself whether they are valid expressions of the Sector 3 code. Those that cannot stand up under the application of reason should be rejected regardless of the source from which they emanate. It should also be noted that we cannot win the game of life or any other game on the strength of good intentions. Of course, we must have an intention to win, but this is not in itself sufficient. There must be actual accomplishment. Those religions that offer some kind of a shortcut whereby the full status of ethical man can be attained by fiat are in direct conflict with the conclusion that the purpose of human existence is the development of ethical men. If that objective could be attained by decree, there would be no need for the huge and complicated mechanism that constitutes the physical universe. Like other games, the game of life involves an element of chance. This is particularly evident in the economic and other non-moral areas. But chance may also play a significant role in determining the extent to which the ethical personality is developed during an individual's lifetime. The handicaps that are imposed on ethical progress where living conditions are unfavorable have already been mentioned. Chance events may also result in termination of life before a person has had adequate time to make significant ethical progress. These are some of the considerations that have led to the conclusion that an alternate route to the ultimate goal of human existence is required, and have inspired the conception of the shortcuts that are now being offered by many religions. Our rejection of these religious answers to the problems that are involved raises questions of equity and justice that should have some attention. We will review them later on. Even if chance does not intervene to prevent victory in a game, one may still not achieve the amount of success to which he would be entitled on the basis of his skill. If the game is under the control of an umpire, a referee, or other official, the player may be the victim of a wrong decision. Or if the game is one involving team play, some member of one's own team may not respond to his moves in the proper manner. Nor will the captain or manager of the team always give each player full opportunity to display his talents. So it is in the game of life. We are always subject to the vagaries of chance, and we are continually encountering obstacles placed in our way, intentionally or unintentionally, by the human individuals with whom we deal. Like those who are successful in playing other games, what we need to do is to learn to take these things in stride, to play the game to the best of our ability, and to enjoy the game while we are playing it. In order to put life into proper perspective, it is necessary to recognize that human existence is an ongoing process, one that is directed toward ethical perfection, and perhaps some other goals as well. We are therefore imperfect by definition, aspirants rather than masters. And although our task is to overcome our imperfections, there is no sound reason why our inability to accomplish this task quickly and completely should lead us into anxiety, guilt, and despair that are emphasized by the existentialist philosophers and are incorporated in a modified form into so many religious doctrines. We have a legacy from our animal origins that has to be overcome before we can reach our ultimate goal. But the fact that this objective has not yet been reached does not justify our acceptance of the sense of guilt that so many are trying to force upon us. Nor is it catastrophic if we stumble occasionally as we advance toward the goal. We are fulfilling our purpose as long as we continue making substantial progress in the right direction. The general situation with respect to the personal aspect of morality can be clarified to a considerable degree by consideration of what we may call Crusoe ethics, as in Robinson Crusoe. In the early days of the development of economic theory, it was quite common to approach economic questions from the standpoint of how the various principles involved would apply to a lone individual on an isolated island. These Robinson Crusoe economics are now out of style, so to speak, but they served a very valuable purpose. And a somewhat similar approach to the morality of the lone individual can be equally productive. On the basis of the principles that we have established, it is evident that Crusoe has a moral obligation to keep himself alive and in good mental and physical condition. He has no primary obligation to work. If work is necessary to meet the primary obligations just mentioned, as it normally would be, then work is a requirement. But this is only a conditional obligation. If the island has a warm climate and plenty of coconut trees, the primary obligations may be satisfied with little or no actual productive effort. If Crusoe does work, either by choice or from necessity, there is no requirement that he limit his work to the minimum amount that is actually essential. An excessive amount of work that would be physically detrimental is barred by the moral code. But in between the minimum that is required and the maximum that is allowed, there is a very substantial margin in which he may make economic decisions. He can choose between leisure and the products of effort, and to the extent that he elects to work, he can choose between one type of product and another. He can make choices as to methods and procedures, the extent to which he diverts time and effort from direct production to the making of tools, for example. He can decide how much use he wants to make of the possibility of storing goods for future consumption, and so on. In this economic activity, Crusoe is living in accordance with the principle of hedonism. He is taking those actions which he believes will bring him the greatest amount of satisfaction. But this hedonism, as he practices it, is not a principle of morality. It has no moral significance at all. As soon as any moral element enters into the situation, the moral aspect is controlling and satisfaction or pleasure is irrelevant. For instance, any intentional action that inflicts physical injury on himself is a violation of the moral code. And if Crusoe is acting as an ethical man, he will avoid such an action, no matter how much pleasure he might have derived from it. Prudence has always been regarded by philosophers as an important moral virtue, even to the extent that it has been classified by some, Epicurus and Bentham, for example, as the primary virtue. But it is evident that to Crusoe, prudence is no more than a conditional obligation, inasmuch as imprudent conduct normally does no more than lessen his pleasure and his comforts. Only in the exceptional case does it involve consequences that make it a violation of the moral code. Like pleasure, prudence is primarily a matter of economics in Crusoe's life rather than a matter of ethics. Okay, I think we'll stop there at the end of this paragraph. We will possibly wrap up this chapter tomorrow. But in the meantime, have a great day. Come back tomorrow and hear what Crusoe does. And we'll see you later. Thanks for tuning in.